The morning Josephine Oliver limped into the dusty general store in Castle Dome, Arizona Territory. In the summer of 1883, she could feel their eyes burning holes through her back like hot irons pressed against skin. She had lived with the injury for 3 years now, ever since that terrible day when the wagon wheel had rolled over her left leg during a flash flood crossing near Yuma. The doctors had done what they could, but her hip had never healed quite right, leaving her with a pronounced limp that made every step a visible reminder of that day. Her father had died in that same accident, swept away by the raging waters while trying to save their supplies. Her mother had followed him to the grave just 6 months later, leaving Josephine alone at 20 years old with nothing but a small inheritance and a body that no longer moved the way it once had. Now, at 23, she had learned to live with the stares and whispers. Castle Dome was a mining town, rough around the edges, filled with men who had come to seek their fortunes in the silver mines that dotted the harsh desert landscape. Women were scarce, and a young, unmarried woman with a limp was apparently fair game for cruel commentary. "Look at her hobble," someone muttered behind her as she made her way down the aisle toward the counter where bolts of fabric were stacked, like a 3-legged mule. Laughter followed, sharp and cutting. Josephine kept her chin up, her spine straight, though her cheeks burned with humiliation. She had come to town specifically to purchase thread and fabric to mend her only good dress, the one she wore to church on Sundays. Her seamstress skills were one of the few ways she could earn a modest income in this unforgiving place. "I heard she used to be pretty before the accident," another voice chimed in, belonging to one of the saloon girls who sometimes came into the store. "What a waste. Pretty don't matter much when a woman walks like that," a man responded. "What man would want to be saddled with damaged goods?" The words hit Josephine like physical blows, but she refused to react. She had heard worse, survived worse. She selected the thread she needed, carefully counting out the coins from her small purse. The store owner, Mr. Patterson, gave her a sympathetic look as he wrapped her purchases, but he said nothing in her defense. No one ever did. She was nearly to the door when a tall figure stepped into her path. "Excuse me, madam," a deep voice said, and she looked up into the kindest gray eyes she had ever seen. The man was probably in his mid-20s, with sun-weathered skin and dark brown hair that curled slightly at the collar of his worn shirt. He wore dusty chaps and spurs that marked him as a working cowboy, and his hat was pushed back on his head in a way that seemed casual and confident. "I could not help but overhear those folks back there, and I wanted to say something if you will allow it." Josephine braced herself for more mockery, more pity, more of the same treatment she always received. "I would prefer you did not," she said quietly, trying to step around him, but he moved with her, not blocking her way exactly, but clearly wanting her attention. "Please, just one moment." His voice was earnest, and something in his expression made her pause. "What?" she asked, tired and wanting nothing more than to return to her small rented room above the boarding house. The cowboy glanced back at the group of people who had been making fun of her, his jaw tightening. Then he looked back at Josephine, and a slow smile spread across his face that transformed his entire countenance. "I was thinking," he said, his voice carrying just loud enough for the others to hear, "that your walk is just about perfect." Josephine stared at him, certain she had misheard. "I beg your pardon, your walk," he repeated, and now his gray eyes were sparkling with something that might have been mischief or might have been sincerity or perhaps both. "It made you walk straight to me, right past all those other folks. I appreciate that, seeing as I have been trying to work up the courage to introduce myself to you for the past 3 weeks, and you just saved me the trouble of figuring out how." Someone behind them laughed, but this time it did not sound cruel. Josephine felt her face flush for an entirely different reason. "You are making fun of me," she said, but there was uncertainty in her voice. "I am not," the cowboy said firmly. He removed his hat, holding it respectfully in his hands. "My name is Gabriel Kane. I work at the Double R Ranch about 5 miles north of town. I have seen you at church the past few Sundays, and I have wanted to make your acquaintance, but I am not much good at talking to pretty women, especially ones who look like they might be too smart for the likes of me." Josephine did not know what to say. No one had called her pretty in years, not since before the accident. No one had looked at her the way this Gabriel Kane was looking at her now, like she was something worth seeing. "I am Josephine Oliver," she finally managed. "And you are either very kind or very foolish." "Maybe both," Gabriel admitted with a grin. "My ma always said I had more heart than sense, but I meant what I said, Miss Oliver. I would be honored if you would allow me to walk you home, seeing as you are headed that direction anyway." Before Josephine could respond, one of the men who had been mocking her earlier spoke up. "You serious, Kane? You want to court a cripple?" The temperature in the store seemed to drop 10 degrees. Gabriel turned slowly, his easy smile vanishing. He handed Josephine his hat, which she took automatically, confused. Then he walked over to the man who had spoken, a rough-looking miner with a thick beard and mean eyes. "I am going to give you one chance to apologize to the lady," Gabriel said quietly. His hands hung loose at his sides, but there was something in his posture that spoke of coiled strength and controlled anger. "Just one." The miner looked around, perhaps expecting support from his friends, but the store had gone silent. Even Mr. Patterson was watching intently. The miner seemed to realize he had miscalculated something. "I did not mean nothing by it," he muttered. "That is not an apology," Gabriel said. "Try again." The miner's face reddened. "Sorry, Miss Oliver," he said grudgingly, not quite meeting her eyes. "Look at her when you say it," Gabriel ordered, "and mean it this time." The miner actually looked frightened now. He met Josephine's gaze and said with more sincerity, "I apologize, miss. I spoke out of turn." Gabriel nodded curtly and returned to Josephine, taking his hat back with a smile that seemed to cost him no effort at all, as if he had not just been radiating quiet menace mere seconds ago. "Now then, Miss Oliver, about that walk home." Josephine found herself nodding, still somewhat dazed by everything that had just transpired. Gabriel offered her his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. Together they walked out of the general store into the blazing Arizona sunshine. The heat hit them like a wall, but Josephine barely noticed. She was too aware of the solid presence of the man beside her, the way he matched his stride to hers without making it obvious, the respectful distance he maintained. They walked in silence for a few moments before Gabriel spoke. "I hope I did not overstep back there," he said. "I just cannot abide folks being cruel for no reason, especially to people who do not deserve it." "You did not need to defend me," Josephine said, though her voice lacked conviction. The truth was, having someone stand up for her had felt wonderful, even if she did not quite trust it yet. "Maybe not," Gabriel agreed, "but I wanted to. There is a difference between need and want, I think." They walked past the assay office, the saloon with its tinny piano music drifting through the swinging doors, the livery stable where horses stamped and snorted in the heat. Castle Dome was not a large town, but it was lively, built up around the mines that had brought fortune seekers from all over the country. The mountains rose in the distance, stark and beautiful in their harsh way. "You said you have been watching me at church," Josephine said, deciding to be direct. "Why?" Gabriel considered the question seriously. "First time I saw you, you were sitting in the third pew on the left side. You were wearing a blue dress, and you were singing the hymns in a voice that made me forget the words to my own song. After the service, I saw you helping Mrs. Henderson with her packages, even though she is perfectly capable of carrying them herself, and you clearly have your own difficulties. You did it anyway with a smile, like it was no burden at all. I thought to myself, there is a woman with a good heart. That is rare enough to be worth pursuing. Josephine felt tears prick at her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She blinked them back. You do not know anything about me. Not yet, Gabriel said cheerfully. But I would like to, if you will give me the chance. They had reached the boarding house where Josephine rented her room. It was a shabby building, but it was clean and relatively quiet. She stopped at the bottom of the exterior stairs that led up to the second-floor entrance, reluctantly releasing Gabriel's arm. I do not understand why you would want to, she said honestly. Court me, I mean. I am not whole, Mr. Kane. I will never walk properly again. I have no family, no prospects, nothing to offer a man like you. Gabriel looked at her for a long moment, his gray eyes serious. Miss Oliver, I work as a cowhand on a ranch. I earn $30 a month plus room and board. I own 2 horses, both of them getting old, a saddle that has seen better days, and about $50 saved up in the bank. I am not exactly a prize catch myself. But I am honest, I work hard, and I treat people right. That is about all I can offer. If you think that is not enough, I will understand. But I would like the chance to get to know you better. Maybe take you to dinner sometime or to the church social next month. Nothing too forward, just a chance. Josephine looked up at this strange, kind man who had appeared in her life like something out of a dream. Part of her wanted to say no, to protect herself from the inevitable disappointment and hurt that would come when he realized what a burden she would be. But another part, a part she had thought died with her father in that flood, wanted desperately to say yes. The church social is 3 weeks away, she said carefully. That is a long time to wait to find out if you really mean what you say. Gabriel's face lit up. Are you saying I can call on you before then? I am saying, Josephine replied, feeling a small smile tug at her lips despite herself, that I will be here at the same time next Saturday when I come to town for supplies. If you happen to be here as well, and if you still feel the same way, then perhaps we could speak again. Next Saturday, Gabriel repeated, as if committing it to memory. I will be here, Miss Oliver. You can count on that. He tipped his hat to her, gave her one more of those knee-weakening smiles, and then walked away toward the livery stable. Josephine watched him go, her heart doing strange things in her chest. She climbed the stairs slowly, her leg aching from the walk, and let herself into her small room. It was not much, just a bed, a small table with a chair, a washstand, and a narrow wardrobe. But it was hers, paid for with money she earned from her sewing and the occasional cleaning work she could find. She set her packages down and moved to the window, looking out at the dusty street below. What had just happened? Had Gabriel Kane really defended her, really asked to court her? It seemed impossible, like something from one of the romantic novels she sometimes borrowed from the library in Yuma on her rare trips to that larger town. Men did not pursue women like her. They married whole, healthy women who could work a farm or a ranch, who could give them strong children, who would not be a burden. But Gabriel had seemed sincere. And the way he had stood up to that miner, the quiet strength in his voice when he demanded an apology, that had been real. She had not imagined it. Josephine moved to her sewing corner, where she kept her needles and thread and the various mending projects she took in for extra money. But she found she could not concentrate on work. Her mind kept replaying the conversation, the look in Gabriel's eyes, the sound of his voice when he said her walk was perfect because it led her to him. It was ridiculous. It was wonderful. It was terrifying. The week that followed was the longest of Josephine's life. She went about her usual routine, taking in sewing, cleaning Mrs. Henderson's house twice, attending church on Sunday where she found herself scanning the congregation for a tall cowboy with gray eyes and a kind smile. She did not see him, and her heart sank despite her best efforts to remain practical. He had changed his mind. Of course he had. In the cold light of day, away from the heat of the moment in the general store, Gabriel Kane had realized what a poor decision it would be to pursue a woman like her. It was what she had expected all along. But when Saturday arrived, Josephine found herself taking extra care with her appearance anyway. She washed her hair, pinned it up in a style that was perhaps more elaborate than necessary for a simple trip to town. She wore her second-best dress, saving the good one for church. She told herself she was being foolish, that she was setting herself up for disappointment, but she could not seem to help it. The walk into town seemed longer than usual. The summer heat was oppressive, and by the time she reached the main street, she was perspiring and her leg was aching. She had a list of supplies to purchase, a commission from Mrs. Henderson for specific fabrics, and several mended garments to deliver to their owners. She completed her errands methodically, trying not to look around for Gabriel, trying not to hope. She was just leaving the dry goods store, her arms full of packages, when she heard that now familiar voice. "Miss Oliver, please tell me you saved some of those packages for me to carry." She turned to find Gabriel standing there, hat in hand, looking even better than she remembered. He was clean-shaven, his hair neatly combed, wearing what appeared to be his Sunday clothes rather than his work gear. "Mr. Kane," she said, fighting to keep the relief and joy out of her voice. "I did not expect to see you." "Then you were not listening when I said I would be here," Gabriel replied, moving forward to take several of the packages from her arms before she could protest. "I am a man of my word, Miss Oliver. When I say something, I mean it." They fell into step together, and Josephine was acutely aware of how natural it felt, how right. "You are wearing your good clothes," she observed. "Well, I am calling on a lady," Gabriel said, as if it were obvious. "Could not very well show up in my work gear, all dusty and smelling of horses." "My ma raised me better than that." "You mentioned your mother before," Josephine said. "Does she live nearby?" A shadow crossed Gabriel's face. "She passed 2 years ago. Fever took her quick. My pa died when I was 16, thrown from a horse that spooked. It was just me and Ma for a long time after that. She taught me how to treat people right, how to be a gentleman even when I had dirt under my fingernails and patches on my clothes." "I am sorry," Josephine said softly. "I lost my parents too. My father in the same accident that injured my leg, and my mother 6 months later. She just gave up, I think. Lost the will to keep going without him." Gabriel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That is a hard thing, losing the people who are supposed to be there to guide you through life. Makes you grow up faster than you should have to." "Yes," Josephine agreed. It was the first time she had talked about her parents with anyone in Castle Dome. Most people knew the basic facts, but no one had ever seemed interested in how she felt about it. "Sometimes I am angry at them for leaving me alone." "Is that terrible?" "It is human," Gabriel said. "I was angry at my ma for a long time after she died. Angry that she left me, angry that she gave up fighting the fever. But eventually I realized that being angry was not helping anyone, least of all me. So I try to remember the good things she taught me, try to live in a way that would make her proud." They had reached the boarding house again, but this time Gabriel did not immediately hand over the packages. "Miss Oliver, I know this is forward, but would you allow me to buy you dinner at the restaurant? Nothing fancy, just a meal and conversation. I promise to be a perfect gentleman." Josephine hesitated. Going to the restaurant with Gabriel would be a public declaration that they were courting. Everyone in town would see, would talk. And when it inevitably ended, when Gabriel realized his mistake, everyone would know about that too. But looking up into his hopeful, earnest face, she found she did not care about any of that. "I would like that," she said. Gabriel's smile was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "Excellent. Let me help you carry these packages up to your room and then we can go." "That would not be proper," Josephine said quickly. "You should not come to my room." "Of course not," Gabriel agreed immediately. "I will wait down here while you take them up. I did not mean to suggest anything improper." Josephine made several trips up and down the stairs, embarrassingly aware that her limp made each journey slower than it should have been. But Gabriel waited patiently, and when she finally came down for the last time, having freshened up and changed into her better dress, his expression made all the effort worthwhile. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and offered her his arm. The restaurant was a small establishment run by a Chinese family, the Wongs, who had come to Castle Dome during the railroad boom, and stayed when they realized they could make a good living feeding hungry miners. The food was an interesting blend of Chinese cooking and American fare, and the prices were reasonable. Josephine had eaten there only once before, shortly after she arrived in town, and she remembered it fondly. Mr. Wong seated them at a table near the window, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he saw them. "Miss Oliver, so good to see you," he said in his accented English. "And you bring gentleman friend. Very good." Gabriel ordered for both of them after consulting with Josephine about what she liked, and soon they had plates of food in front of them that smelled heavenly. As they ate, they talked, really talked, in a way that Josephine had not talked to another person in years. Gabriel told her about growing up on a small farm in Texas, about how his father had been a skilled horseman who had taught him everything about working with animals. He spoke of coming west after his mother died, looking for work and a fresh start. He had been in Arizona for about 8 months, working at the Double R Ranch alongside 10 other cowhands under a foreman named Dutch McCurdy. "Dutch is tough but fair," Gabriel explained. "He expects a full day's work, but he does not ask anything of us he would not do himself. The owner, Mr. Randall, lives back east somewhere. He bought the ranch as an investment and hardly ever visits. Dutch runs the whole operation." "What is it like, working on a ranch?" Josephine asked. She knew very little about ranching, having grown up in a small town in New Mexico where her father had run a freight business. "Hard work," Gabriel said honestly. "We are up before dawn, working until after dark most days. Mending fences, checking on the cattle, breaking horses, moving the herd to better grazing. It is hot in summer, cold in winter, and always dusty. But I like it. I like working outside, like being with the animals. And the other fellows are good men, mostly. We look out for each other." "Do you think you will stay there?" Josephine asked. "Or do you have other plans?" Gabriel was quiet for a moment, pushing food around his plate. "I have been saving my money," he said finally, "hoping that maybe one day I could have a small spread of my own. Nothing fancy, just enough land to run some cattle, maybe raise horses, have a home, a family." He looked up at her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression. "That probably sounds foolish to a practical woman like yourself." "It does not sound foolish at all," Josephine said softly. "It sounds like a good dream." "What about you?" Gabriel asked. "What are your dreams, Miss Oliver?" No one had ever asked her that before. Josephine considered the question carefully. "I used to dream of having a dress shop," she said. "A real one in a city where ladies would come to have their clothes made. I am good at sewing, at designing. But that was before the accident. Now I just hope to keep myself fed and sheltered to earn enough from my needlework to get by." "Why can you not still have the dress shop?" Gabriel asked. "Your leg does not affect your hands, does it?" "No, but it affects how people see me," Josephine replied. "No fashionable lady wants a crippled seamstress making her clothes. It reflects poorly on her." Gabriel frowned. "That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard. A person's worth has nothing to do with how they walk." "You say that now," Josephine said, "but the rest of the world does not agree with you." "Then the rest of the world is wrong," Gabriel said firmly. "And I intend to prove it to you, Miss Oliver, if you will give me the chance." They finished their meal, and Gabriel paid despite Josephine's protests. As they left the restaurant, the sun was beginning to set, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Gabriel walked her back to the boarding house, and at the bottom of the stairs, he took her hand gently. "Thank you for having dinner with me," he said. "It was the best evening I have had in a long time." "Thank you for inviting me," Josephine replied. Her hand felt small in his, but his touch was warm and careful, as if she were something precious. "May I call on you again next Saturday?" Gabriel asked. "And perhaps on Wednesday as well. I have that afternoon off, and I thought maybe we could take a walk if you are feeling up to it." "A walk?" Josephine repeated, gesturing to her leg. "A slow walk," Gabriel amended. "We will go at whatever pace you set. There is a spot about a mile out of town where the creek runs, and this time of year there are wildflowers. I thought you might like to see it." Josephine wanted to say yes so badly it hurt, but she had to be honest. "A mile might be too far for me," she admitted. "My leg gets tired." "Then we will walk as far as you can manage, and when you need to rest, we will rest," Gabriel said simply. "I am not in a hurry, Miss Oliver. We have all the time in the world." That was how their courtship began, with slow walks and Saturday dinners and long conversations that revealed more of each other with every meeting. Gabriel was patient and kind, never pushing Josephine beyond her comfort, always matching his stride to hers. He met her after church on Sundays and walked her home. He showed up when she was delivering mending to customers and carried her packages. He brought her wildflowers, and once, memorably, a small cactus in a pot because he said its stubborn determination to bloom in harsh conditions reminded him of her. The people of Castle Dome watched their courtship with varying degrees of interest and disapproval. Some thought Gabriel was a fool for pursuing a crippled woman. Others admired his loyalty. Mrs. Henderson, who had become something of a friend to Josephine, was delighted and took credit for their meeting, despite having nothing to do with it. "I always knew some good man would see your worth," Mrs. Henderson told Josephine one afternoon as they sat in her parlor, Josephine mending and Mrs. Henderson knitting. "You just needed the right person to look past the surface." "Gabriel does not look past anything," Josephine said. "He just sees things differently than other people do." "That is the mark of a good man," Mrs. Henderson said approvingly. "My late husband was the same way. He saw me when everyone else just saw the preacher's daughter who was expected to marry some suitable young minister. Instead, I married a merchant, and we had 40 happy years together." As the weeks turned into months, Josephine found herself falling in love with Gabriel Kane. It was not a sudden thing, not a lightning bolt, but rather a slow, steady warmth that grew in her chest whenever she saw him. She loved his laugh, his kindness, the way he treated everyone with respect regardless of their station. She loved how he talked to horses in a low, soothing voice, and how he always carried candy in his pocket to give to children. She loved his strength, both physical and moral, the way he stood up for what was right even when it was difficult. But she was also afraid. Afraid that he would change his mind, afraid that he would wake up one day and realize he had made a mistake. afraid that her damaged body would eventually become too much of a burden. Those fears came to a head on a warm evening in October, 4 months after they had first met. Gabriel had asked if he could speak with her privately, and they had walked to their favorite spot by the creek. The wildflowers were gone now, but the cottonwood trees were turning gold, and the air had finally cooled from the summer's oppressive heat. Gabriel seemed nervous, which was unusual for him. He kept starting to speak and then stopping, running his hand through his hair in a gesture Josephine had come to recognize as a sign of agitation. "What is wrong?" she finally asked. "You are acting strangely." Gabriel laughed, but it sounded shaky. "I am terrified," he admitted. "Josephine, I need to tell you something, and I am afraid of how you might react." Her stomach dropped. This was it, she thought. This was when he would tell her that he had enjoyed their time together but had realized it could not continue. She braced herself. "Just say it," she said, keeping her voice steady with effort. Gabriel took a deep breath. "I am in love with you," he said. "I have been for months now, probably since that first day in the general store when you looked at me like you were not sure if I was real or not. I love everything about you, Josephine. Your strength, your kindness, your smile, the way you hum when you are concentrating on your sewing. I love how you help people even when you have nothing to spare, how you never complain even though I know your leg causes you pain. I love talking to you, being with you, and I cannot imagine my future without you in it." Josephine stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. "You love me," she repeated stupidly. "With everything I am," Gabriel said. He moved closer, taking her hands in his. "I know we have not been courting for very long, and I know I do not have much to offer you, but I am going to leave the Double R. Dutch has been training me, and I have enough saved now to lease a small piece of land about 10 miles from here. It is not much, but it has water and decent grazing. I want to start my own ranch, Josephine, and I want you to be my wife." "Your wife," Josephine echoed. She felt dizzy, like the world had tilted on its axis. Gabriel squeezed her hands gently. "I know this is sudden, and I know you might need time to think about it. But I needed you to know how I feel, what I am planning. I want to build a life with you, Josephine. I want to marry you, have children with you if we are blessed that way, grow old with you. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are beside me. Please say you will at least consider it." Tears were streaming down Josephine's face now, hot and fast. "Gabriel, I am not whole. I will never be able to work the way a ranch wife needs to work. I cannot ride horses, cannot help with the heavy labor. I would be a burden to you." "You are not a burden," Gabriel said fiercely. "You are a blessing. Josephine, a ranch needs more than physical labor. It needs someone to manage the household, to handle the accounts, to make clothes and cook meals and make it a home instead of just a place to sleep. You can do all of that. And as for the rest, we will hire help when we need it. I am not asking you to be something you are not. I am asking you to be exactly who you are, because that is the woman I fell in love with." "But what about children?" Josephine asked. "What if my injury makes it difficult or dangerous for me to carry a child?" "Then we will deal with that if and when it happens," Gabriel said. "Josephine, life does not come with guarantees for anyone. Any woman might have difficulty with childbirth. Any man might get injured and be unable to work. We face what comes together and we figure it out. That is what marriage is." Josephine looked into Gabriel's gray eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and love. He really meant it. He really wanted her just as she was, limp and all. The realization was overwhelming. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have been afraid to admit it, afraid to believe it could be real. But I do, Gabriel. I love you so much." Gabriel's face transformed with joy. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her carefully, and she rested her head against his chest, hearing his heart beating fast beneath her ear. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other as the sun set and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Is that a yes?" Gabriel finally asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Will you marry me, Josephine Oliver?" "Yes," Josephine said, pulling back to look up at him. "Yes, I will marry you, Gabriel Kane." Gabriel let out a whoop of joy that startled a nearby bird into flight, and then he was kissing her, soft and sweet and perfect. It was Josephine's first kiss, and it made her feel like she was flying, like her leg did not matter at all, like she was exactly as she was meant to be. They were married 6 weeks later, on a crisp November morning in the small church in Castle Dome. Mrs. Henderson helped Josephine make her wedding dress, a simple but elegant gown of cream-colored fabric with delicate embroidery at the cuffs and collar. Gabriel wore a new suit purchased for the occasion, and he could not stop smiling as Josephine walked down the aisle toward him. She was acutely aware of her limp as she made that walk, aware of the eyes watching her. But then she looked at Gabriel, saw the love and pride in his face, and nothing else mattered. When she reached the front of the church, he took her hand and whispered, "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." The ceremony was short and sweet, presided over by Pastor Williams. The small church was filled with people from town, some genuinely happy for them, others simply curious. Dutch McCurdy was there, along with several of the other ranch hands from the Double R. Mrs. Henderson was crying happy tears. Mr. Wung and his family had closed the restaurant to attend, which touched Josephine deeply. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Gabriel kissed Josephine with such tenderness that she felt tears slip down her cheeks. They were married. She was Mrs. Gabriel Kane now, and she had never been happier in her life. The reception was held in the church hall, with food contributed by various townspeople. Mrs. Henderson had made a cake, and the Wung family had prepared several dishes. There was music and dancing, and though Josephine could not dance, Gabriel stayed by her side for most of the evening, holding her hand and introducing her to people as "my wife," with such obvious pride that it made her heart swell. When the sun began to set, they said their goodbyes and climbed into the wagon Gabriel had borrowed for the occasion. Their belongings, which were not many, had already been moved to the small house on the leased land that would be their new home. Gabriel had been working on fixing it up for weeks, and he had described it to Josephine in detail, but she had not yet seen it. The ride took about an hour, following a rough track that wound through the desert. The full moon rose as they traveled, bathing the landscape in silver light. Gabriel drove carefully, mindful of the ruts and rocks. Josephine sat close to him, marveling at the fact that this kind, wonderful man was now her husband. "Are you nervous?" Gabriel asked, glancing at her. "A little," Josephine admitted. They had been very proper during their courtship, never more than kissing, and the thought of what would happen on their wedding night made her both anxious and excited. "Me too," Gabriel confessed. "But we will figure it out together. There is no rush, Josephine. Tonight and every night we go at your pace. I want you to be comfortable and happy." The house appeared in the distance, a small dark shape against the moonlit desert. As they drew closer, Josephine could see that it was a simple adobe structure, probably 2 or 3 rooms at most. But there was a corral beside it, and what looked like a small barn. Gabriel had told her there were already a dozen cattle on the property, purchased with the last of his savings, and 2 horses besides his own. Gabriel pulled the wagon to a stop and jumped down, then came around to help Josephine descend. But instead of simply offering his hand, he swept her up into his arms, making her gasp in surprise. "Gabriel, you're back," she protested. "I am too heavy." "You are perfect," he corrected, carrying her toward the door. And I am carrying my bride over the threshold the way it is supposed to be done." He had to fumble a bit with the door while still holding her, which made them both laugh, but he managed it. The inside of the house was lit by several lanterns Gabriel must have set up before coming to town for the wedding. It was small but clean, with whitewashed walls and a packed earth floor. The main room held a simple table and chairs, a cookstove, and some shelves. A doorway led to what must be the bedroom, and another to a small storage area. It was humble, but Gabriel had clearly worked hard to make it welcoming. There were curtains at the windows, a colorful rug on the floor, and wildflowers in a jar on the table. Josephine felt tears prick her eyes again. "It is not much," Gabriel said, setting her down carefully, "but it is ours, and we will make it into a real home together." "It is perfect," Josephine said, meaning it. This little house was more than she had ever dared to hope for. It was a future, a life, a place where she belonged. That night, in the small bedroom with its simple bed and handmade quilt, Gabriel was as gentle and patient as he had been throughout their courtship. He took his time, making sure Josephine was comfortable, stopping when she needed him to, whispering words of love and reassurance. It was awkward at times, as first times often are, but it was also beautiful and perfect in its own way. When they finally lay together afterward, Josephine's head on Gabriel's chest and his arms around her, she felt more complete than she had ever felt in her life. "I love you, Mrs. Kane," Gabriel murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I love you too, Mr. Kane," Josephine replied, smiling in the darkness. The months that followed were both challenging and wonderful. Ranch life was indeed hard work, but Gabriel had been right when he said Josephine could contribute. While he was out tending to the cattle and horses, she managed the household, cooked meals, tended a small vegetable garden she had planted, and continued her sewing work to bring in extra income. She made curtains and clothes, mended Gabriel's work shirts when they tore, and even took on commissions from women in Castle Dome who had seen her wedding dress and wanted her skills. Gabriel hired a young man named Tom Riley to help with the ranch work, paying him a small wage plus meals. Tom was 17, an orphan who had been working odd jobs around town, and he was grateful for the steady work. He slept in the small barn and took his meals with Gabriel and Josephine, quickly becoming almost like family. The winter was cold, and Josephine's leg often ached in the dampness, but Gabriel had built up a good supply of firewood, and the little house stayed warm. They played cards in the evenings, read from the few books they owned, and talked about their dreams for the future. "I want to expand the herd," Gabriel said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Maybe double it in the next 2 years, and I have been thinking about horses. There is good money in breeding and training horses for the army and for ranchers." "We would need more land for that," Josephine said practically. She had been going over their accounts and knew their finances down to the last penny. "I know," Gabriel said. "But if we keep saving, keep building up what we have, maybe in a few years we could lease more land or even buy some." "It is possible, Josephine. We are making it work." And they were. It was not easy, and there were setbacks. One of the cattle died from illness. A fence broke during a storm and had to be repaired. There were days when Gabriel came home so exhausted he could barely eat before falling into bed. But there were also good days. Days when everything went right, when the work was satisfying, when they sat together and watched the sunset and marveled at what they were building. In the spring, Josephine discovered she was pregnant. She had been feeling unwell for a few weeks, tired and nauseated, before Mrs. Henderson gently suggested she might be expecting. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. Josephine remembered her fears about whether her injury would affect her ability to carry a child, and she insisted on traveling to Yuma to see a proper doctor. The doctor, an older man named Dr. Thornton, examined her carefully and asked detailed questions about her injury and how it had healed. Finally, he pronounced that while her leg injury might make the later stages of pregnancy more uncomfortable, he saw no reason why she could not carry and deliver a child successfully. "You will need to rest more than most women," he advised. "Do not try to do too much physical labor, especially in the last few months, and make sure you have a midwife or doctor present for the birth, just to be cautious." Gabriel, who had insisted on coming with her, looked relieved. "We will make sure she is careful," he promised, "whatever she needs." True to his word, Gabriel became even more protective as Josephine's pregnancy progressed. He did not want her lifting anything heavy, walking too far, or overexerting herself in any way. It was sweet, but also sometimes frustrating, as Josephine was used to being independent. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," she told him one afternoon when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "I need to keep active, Gabriel. The doctor said so." "I know," Gabriel said, looking chastened. "I am sorry. I just worry about you, about the baby. I could not bear it if anything happened to either of you." Josephine softened. "I know, and I love you for caring, but you have to trust me to know my own limits. I promise I will be careful." They found a balance, and the pregnancy continued without major complications. Josephine's leg did ache more as her belly grew, and there were days when she had to spend more time sitting than she would have liked, but overall she felt well. The baby was active, kicking and moving, and sometimes she would guide Gabriel's hand to her stomach so he could feel it too. The look of wonder on his face in those moments never failed to move her. Mrs. Henderson agreed to serve as midwife for the birth, having helped deliver many babies over the years. As Josephine's due date approached in late autumn, Gabriel became increasingly anxious. He made sure there was plenty of firewood, plenty of food, plenty of water. He checked and rechecked the supplies Mrs. Henderson said they would need. He barely slept, starting awake at every sound, convinced Josephine was going into labor. When the time actually came on a cool October evening, Gabriel nearly panicked. Josephine's water broke during dinner, and the contractions started shortly after. Gabriel sent Tom riding into town to fetch Mrs. Henderson while he tried to help Josephine get comfortable. "What do I do?" he asked, looking lost. "Tell me what to do." "Just stay with me," Josephine said, gripping his hand as a contraction hit. "Do not leave me alone." "Never," Gabriel promised. Mrs. Henderson arrived within an hour, taking charge with calm efficiency. She sent Gabriel out of the bedroom at one point, saying he was making Josephine nervous with his pacing, but Josephine called him back after a few minutes. "I need him here," she said firmly, and Mrs. Henderson did not argue. The labor was long and difficult. Josephine's injured leg cramped and ached, making it hard to find a comfortable position. The pain was worse than anything she had ever experienced. But Gabriel stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, whispering encouragement. "You can do this," he said. "You are the strongest person I know, Josephine, just a little more." Finally, as dawn was breaking, their son was born. He came into the world screaming lustily, red-faced and perfect. Mrs. Henderson cleaned him up and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Josephine's arms. "A healthy boy," she announced, smiling. "Congratulations." Josephine looked down at her son, at his tiny features and dark hair, and felt love so overwhelming it took her breath away. Gabriel sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the baby with an expression of awe. "We made him," he said softly. "Josephine, we made this perfect little person." "We did," Josephine agreed, tears streaming down her face. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names before but had not settled on anything definite. Gabriel reached out and gently touched his son's tiny hand, and the baby gripped his finger with surprising strength. "How about James?" Gabriel suggested. "After your father, James Oliver Kane." Josephine nodded, too emotional to speak. She had told Gabriel stories about her father, about his kindness and his sense of humor, about how much she had loved him. Naming their son after him felt right. "James," she whispered. "Hello, James. Welcome to the world." The weeks that followed were exhausting but joyful. James was a hungry baby, waking every few hours to nurse, and Josephine was constantly tired. Her leg ached from the demands of caring for an infant, from the standing and walking and rocking. But Gabriel was wonderful, helping as much as he could. He changed nappies, walked the floor with James when he was fussy, sang lullabies in his deep voice that often put both baby and mother to sleep. Tom Riley proved surprisingly good with the baby as well, making silly faces that made James smile, and carefully holding him when Josephine needed both hands free for something. They had become a little family, the four of them, and Josephine marveled at how much her life had changed since that day in the general store when Gabriel had first spoken to her. When James was 3 months old, Gabriel came home one evening with news. "Mr. Randall is selling the double R," he announced. "Dutch told me today. Apparently the ranch is not making enough profit for Randall's tastes, and he wants to invest his money elsewhere." "What will happen to Dutch and the other men?" Josephine asked, concerned. "Whoever buys it will likely keep them on," Gabriel said. "They are good workers. But Josephine, this is an opportunity. If we could somehow buy this land we are leasing instead of just renting it, we would have security. We could really build something lasting here. How much would it cost?" Josephine asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "More than we have," Gabriel admitted, "but maybe not more than we could get. I was thinking about going to the bank, seeing if they would give us a loan. We have a good track record, we have been paying our lease on time, we have been turning a profit. It might be possible." They discussed it long into the night, weighing the risks and rewards. A loan would mean debt, would mean pressure to make sure the ranch stayed profitable. But owning land would mean stability, would mean James would have something to inherit, would mean they were building a real future. In the end, they decided to try. Gabriel met with the banker, Mr. Stevens, and presented their case. To their surprise and relief, Mr. Stevens agreed to the loan, impressed by their hard work and careful management. The terms were not overly generous, but they were reasonable. With the loan, they could buy the 200 acres they had been leasing, plus the house and outbuildings. "We are landowners," Gabriel said, staring at the deed after they had signed all the papers. "Josephine, we actually own this place now." "It is terrifying," Josephine said honestly, holding James close. "What if we cannot make the loan payments? What if something goes wrong?" "Then we will figure it out," Gabriel said, the same thing he had been saying since the day he proposed. "We always do." And they did. The years passed, and the small ranch grew slowly but steadily. They added more cattle, bought a few horses that Gabriel trained and sold for good prices. Tom Riley stayed on, eventually building his own small cabin on the property and becoming the ranch foreman when they hired 2 more men to help with the work. Josephine's sewing business continued to bring in supplemental income, and she became known throughout the region for the quality of her work. When James was 2, Josephine discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because her body had already done it once. Their daughter was born on a warm spring morning, a quick and relatively easy birth that left Mrs. Henderson shaking her head in amazement. "Every birth is different," she said. This one was in a hurry to get here. They named her Grace Mary Kane, and she was as different from her brother as could be. Where James had been a fussy baby, Grace was placid and content. She had Josephine's dark eyes and Gabriel's smile, and her father was completely besotted with her from the first moment he held her. Life settled into a rhythm. The ranch work continued, with its seasons of planting and harvesting, of moving cattle and breaking horses. James grew into a lively, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, begging to help with the horses. Grace toddled after her brother, trying to keep up. Josephine managed the household, the accounts, the constant demands of keeping everyone fed and clothed and happy. There were hard times, too. A drought one year that killed off some of their herd. A bad fall Gabriel took from a spooked horse that left him with a broken arm and unable to work for weeks. An illness that swept through the region, sparing their family but killing several people they knew in town. But they weathered each crisis together, leaning on each other, finding strength in their partnership. Josephine's limp never went away. There were days when the pain was worse, days when she could barely walk at all. But Gabriel never once complained about the extra work that fell on him when she was having a bad day. He never made her feel like she was less than, like she was a burden. He just picked up the slack, brought her tea, rubbed her aching leg, and told her he loved her. On their 10th anniversary, Gabriel took Josephine back to the spot by the creek where he had first told her he loved her. It was a warm evening, and they left James and Grace in Tom's capable care for a few hours. They walked slowly, hand in hand, taking their time. The creek was running well after the spring rains, and the cottonwoods were in full leaf. Gabriel spread out a blanket, and they sat together, watching the water flow past. "You ever regret it?" Josephine asked. It was a question that sometimes still haunted her, even after all these years. "Marrying me, I mean. Taking on the challenges that came with me." Gabriel looked at her with those gray eyes that still made her heart skip a beat. "Not for a single moment," he said. "Josephine, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. These past 10 years with you have been the happiest of my life. Do you regret marrying me?" "Never," Josephine said fiercely. "I just wanted to make sure you felt the same." "I do," Gabriel said. "And I will keep feeling the same for the next 10 years, and the 10 after that, and for however long we have together." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small package. "I got you something." Josephine unwrapped it to find a beautiful silver bracelet, delicately worked with a pattern of flowers. It must have cost him dearly. "Gabriel, this is too much." "It is not enough," he said, fastening it around her wrist. "You deserve so much more than I can give you. But I wanted you to have something beautiful, something that lasts." Josephine threw her arms around him, holding him tight. "I have everything I need," she whispered. "I have you, I have our children, I have our home. What more could I possibly want?" They sat together until the stars came out, talking and laughing and remembering all that they had been through together. When they finally headed back to the house, walking slowly in the moonlight, Josephine felt a deep sense of peace. Her life had not turned out the way she had once imagined it would. It had been harder in some ways, with pain and loss and challenges she never expected. But it had also been so much richer, so much fuller than she had dared to dream. She had found love with a man who saw her not as broken or damaged, but as whole and worthy. She had built a life, a family, a home. And every time she walked, every step she took with her uneven gait, she was reminded of Gabriel's words that first day in the general store. Her walk had led her straight to him, and it was the best direction she had ever gone. The children grew, as children do. James at 16 was already taller than his father, lanky and strong from ranch work. He had Gabriel's way with horses, able to calm even the most skittish animal with his patient approach. Grace at 14 was quieter, more studious, with a talent for drawing that had emerged when she was small. She sketched everything she saw, filling sketchbooks with images of the ranch, the animals, the desert landscape. They had been blessed with one more child, a surprise late in life when Josephine was 36. Samuel had been born healthy and loud, and at 7 years old, he was a whirlwind of energy and mischief. He was the child most like Josephine in temperament, stubborn and determined, refusing to let anything slow him down. The ranch had prospered over the years. They now owned 400 acres, having been able to purchase the adjacent property when it came up for sale. The herd had grown to over 100 head of cattle, and Gabriel's reputation as a horse trainer was known throughout Arizona territory. They had built a larger house, with separate bedrooms for the children and a proper kitchen. There was a bunkhouse now for the 4 men they employed year-round. Tom Riley had married a woman named Sarah from town, and they had their own family in a house Gabriel had helped Tom build on a piece of land carved from the ranch. Tom was still the foreman, but he was also a friend, someone who had been with them through everything. Josephine's sewing had evolved into something more ambitious. She now designed and made clothes that were sold in a small shop in Yuma. She had never gotten her dress shop in a city, but she had found success in her own way, and it was deeply satisfying. Her work supported the family, supplementing the ranch income, and she was proud of what she had built with her own hands and talent. One afternoon in late summer, when Josephine was 42 and Gabriel was 44, they received a telegram that the pastor in Castle Dome wanted to see them. It was unusual enough that they made the trip to town, curious and a bit concerned. Pastor Williams, now quite elderly, greeted them warmly in the church office. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I wanted to talk to you about something important." He explained that he was planning to retire, and the church was looking for someone to take over. But before he left, he wanted to establish a fund to help young people in the community who were struggling, who needed a hand up to get started in life. "I thought of you too," he said, looking at them over his spectacles. "Your story, how you came together, how you have built a life against the odds. You have become an example in this community of what is possible when 2 people work together with love and determination. I would like to name this fund after you if you will allow it. The Kane Fund for Young People. It would provide small loans or grants to help young folks get started, whether they want to start a business, buy land, or learn a trade." Josephine was stunned. "Pastor Williams, we are just ordinary people. We have not done anything special." "You are wrong about that," the pastor said gently. "You have shown that circumstances do not define a person's worth, that hard work and love can overcome almost anything. That is a powerful message, and it is worth honoring." Gabriel looked at Josephine, and she saw the emotion in his eyes. "We would be honored," he said, his voice rough. "If you think it would help people, then we are glad to have our name attached to it." The fund was established, and over the years, it helped dozens of young people get their start. Every time Josephine heard about another success story, another person who had used the fund to build a life for themselves, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. Her struggles, her pain, had not been meaningless. They had led her to Gabriel, and together they had created something that would outlast them both. As they grew older, the ranch work shifted more to James and the hired men, though Gabriel still went out every day, unwilling to fully retire. Josephine's leg troubled her more as the years passed, arthritis settling into the old injury and making some days difficult. But she had learned long ago how to manage the pain, how to pace herself, how to ask for help when she needed it. Grace went to Tucson to study at the university when she was 18. something that would have been unthinkable when Josephine was that age. She wanted to be an artist, to learn more about her craft, and Gabriel and Josephine supported her dream with the money they had carefully saved. She wrote home regularly, sending sketches and telling them about her classes, her teachers, the wonderful wide world she was discovering. Samuel showed an interest in medicine, fascinated by the veterinary work Dr. Morris did in the area. He apprenticed with the doctor when he was 15, learning how to treat sick and injured animals. It was possible he might become a veterinarian himself one day if he continued his studies. James, to no one's surprise, stayed on the ranch. He had never wanted to be anywhere else. When he was 22, he married a woman named Emily from a neighboring ranch, and they moved into the house Tom and Sarah had lived in before they moved to a larger place closer to town. James and Emily's first child, a boy they named Gabriel after his grandfather, was born a year later. Holding her grandson for the first time, Josephine felt the circle of life complete in a way she had never imagined. This child, this perfect little person, existed because she and Gabriel had found each other, had refused to let others' opinions define what was possible for them. "He has your eyes," Gabriel said softly, standing beside her as she cradled the baby. His hair was more gray than brown now, and his face was lined with years of sun and wind, but to Josephine he was as handsome as the day she met him. "He has your smile," Josephine replied. "Look at him, Gabriel." "Our grandson." "I never thought I would see this day," Gabriel admitted. "When I was a young man alone in the world with nothing but a horse and a saddle, I never imagined I would have all of this. A wife I love more than life itself, children and grandchildren, land and a home. It is more than I ever dreamed of." "It is more than I dreamed of too," Josephine said. She looked up at him, at the man who had changed her entire life with a few kind words in a general store. "You gave me this, Gabriel, all of it. You saw me when everyone else looked past me. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. You built this life for us." "We built it together," Gabriel corrected. "I just pointed us in the right direction. You did all the hard work of walking the path with me." They stood together, looking down at their grandson, surrounded by the life they had created. Outside, the sun was setting over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Inside, the house was filled with family, with love, with the sound of laughter and conversation. Josephine's leg ached as it always did, but she barely noticed. She was too full of joy, too grateful for every moment that had led her to this place. Her injury had once seemed like the end of everything. Instead, it had been the beginning. It had brought her to Gabriel, had given her this beautiful, messy, wonderful life. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. Grace graduated from university and returned to Arizona, opening a small gallery in Tucson where she sold her own work and that of other artists. She married a kind man named Robert who taught at the university, and they had 2 daughters. Samuel did become a veterinarian, studying in California before returning home to open his own practice serving the ranches and farms throughout the region. He never married, content with his work and his involvement with his extended family. James and Emily had 3 more children, filling the ranch with laughter and energy. Gabriel spent his later years teaching his grandchildren everything he knew about horses and cattle and the land, passing on a legacy that would continue long after he was gone. Tom and Sarah's children grew up alongside the Kane grandchildren, the families intertwined in a way that went beyond business. They celebrated holidays together, helped each other through hard times, rejoiced in each other's successes. The community that Gabriel and Josephine had helped build was strong and supportive, a testament to the values they had lived by. When Gabriel was 65, he finally admitted that he needed to slow down. A lifetime of hard physical labor had taken its toll on his body, and though his spirit was still strong, his joints ached and his back troubled him. He turned the day-to-day operation of the ranch over to James, though he still went out every morning to check on things and offer advice when asked. Josephine, at 63, still did some sewing but had cut back significantly. Her hands were gnarled with arthritis, and her vision was not what it once was. But she spent her days contentedly, reading to her grandchildren, working in her garden, sitting on the porch with Gabriel as they watched the sunset together as they had done for over 40 years. One evening, as they sat in their customary spot, Gabriel reached over and took Josephine's hand. "Do you remember that first day?" he asked. "In the general store." "Every detail," Josephine said. She had told the story countless times over the years to their children, their grandchildren, anyone who asked how they had met. But it never got old, never lost its power. "You were so confident, so certain that I would give you a chance." "I was terrified," Gabriel admitted. "I had been watching you for weeks, trying to work up the courage to talk to you. And then those people were being cruel, and I just could not stand by and let it happen. But I was sure you would tell me to go away, that you would not want anything to do with some dusty cowhand who was too forward." "I almost did," Josephine confessed. "I was so sure you were making fun of me, or that you would change your mind once you realized what you were taking on." "I never changed my mind," Gabriel said. "Not for a second. You were what I wanted from the moment I saw you. Everything that came after just confirmed what I already knew." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, watching as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. After a while, Josephine said, "I wish everyone could have what we have. This kind of love, this kind of partnership. The world would be a better place." "Maybe our grandchildren will," Gabriel said. "Maybe they will remember us and know that real love exists, that it is worth fighting for, worth working for." "That is a legacy too, is it not?" "It is," Josephine agreed. "Maybe the best one." Gabriel turned to look at her, his gray eyes as warm as they had been 43 years ago when he first told her he loved her. "Thank you, Josephine Kane. Thank you for taking a chance on me, for building this life with me, for every day we have had together. You have made me happier than I ever thought possible." "Thank you for seeing me," Josephine replied, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Thank you for looking past what everyone else saw and finding the person I really was. Thank you for every kindness, every moment of patience, every day of love. You gave me a life I never dreamed I could have." They kissed, soft and sweet, and then sat together as night fell fully over their land, over the life they had built together from nothing but love and determination, and an absolute refusal to let the world tell them what was possible. Gabriel lived to be 73, passing peacefully in his sleep on a cool autumn night. He had been working with the horses the day before, teaching his great-grandson Gabriel the finer points of training. He had seemed tired at dinner but happy, surrounded by family. He had kissed Josephine goodnight, told her he loved her as he did every night, and simply did not wake up in the morning. The entire region turned out for his funeral. The church in Castle Dome was packed, with people standing in the back and spilling out into the yard. They came to pay respects to a man who had been honest and kind, who had worked hard and treated everyone fairly, who had loved his wife and family with his whole heart. The pastor talked about Gabriel's life, about the example he had set, about the way he had seen past surface appearances to the worth in people. Josephine sat in the front pew, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and felt both grief and gratitude. She mourned the loss of her partner, her love, the man who had been beside her for 46 years. But she was grateful for every moment they had shared, for the life he had given her, for the legacy they had built together. After the funeral, after everyone had gone home, James drove his mother back to the ranch. She sat in silence, looking out at the land that she and Gabriel had made into something lasting. When they reached the house, she asked James to help her out to the porch, to the spot where she and Gabriel had sat together so many evenings. "Are you sure, Ma?" James asked. "It is getting cold. You should be inside." "Just for a few minutes," Josephine said. "I need to feel close to him." She sat in Gabriel's chair, something she had never done while he was alive, and looked out at the desert, at the mountains in the distance, at the sky turning pink and orange with sunset. She could almost feel Gabriel beside her, could almost hear his voice telling her that everything would be all right. "I miss you," she whispered to the empty air. "I miss you so much already, but I am grateful, my love, grateful for every day, every moment. You gave me a life I never thought I could have. You loved me when no one else did, when I did not love myself. You saw me, really saw me, and you chose me anyway. That was the greatest gift anyone ever gave me." The sun set, and the stars came out, and Josephine sat alone but not alone, wrapped in memories of 46 years of love. Finally, when the cold became too much for her old bones, she went inside. But she would return to that spot every evening for the rest of her life, sitting in Gabriel's chair, feeling his presence, remembering. Josephine lived for another 8 years after Gabriel's death. She was increasingly frail, her leg giving her more and more trouble, but her mind remained sharp and her spirit strong. She spent her days with family, telling stories about Gabriel, about the early days of the ranch, about all they had built together. She was the matriarch of a large and thriving family, and she took great joy in watching them grow and prosper. When she was 81, on a warm spring morning very much like the one when Grace had been born, Josephine passed away peacefully in her sleep. James found her in her bed, looking serene, a slight smile on her weathered face. On her nightstand was a photograph of her and Gabriel taken on their 40th anniversary. The two of them standing together in front of the ranch house they had built, their arms around each other, their love evident in every line of their faces. They buried her beside Gabriel in the small cemetery outside Castle Dome, under a cottonwood tree that Gabriel had once said reminded him of Josephine, strong and enduring despite the harsh climate. The entire family was there, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, along with countless friends and neighbors whose lives had been touched by Josephine and Gabriel's kindness. An example. At the graveside, James spoke about his mother, about her strength and resilience, about how she had overcome so much adversity to build a beautiful life. He talked about her love for Gabriel, about the partnership they had shared, about the lessons they had taught their children about love and loyalty and perseverance. "My mother used to tell me about the day she met my father," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "About how people were mocking her for her limp, and my father stepped up and said it made her walk straight to him. She said that was the moment she knew there was still goodness in the world, still kindness, still hope. And she carried that hope with her for the rest of her life. She and my father built something lasting, not just this ranch, but a family, a legacy of love that will continue for generations. That is what we are honoring today, not just my mother's life, but the life she and my father built together." As they lowered Josephine into the ground beside Gabriel, the grandchildren sang the hymn that had been sung at both their wedding and at Gabriel's funeral. The sun shone down warm and bright, and a gentle breeze rustled through the cottonwood leaves, and it seemed right somehow, fitting. Gabriel and Josephine were together again, as they were always meant to be, The ranch continued to prosper under James's management, and then under his son Gabriel's after him. The Kane Fund for Young People continued to help new generations get their start in life. Grace's Gallery became a respected institution in Tucson. Samuel's veterinary practice expanded to include 2 partners and served the entire southern Arizona region. The house that Gabriel and Josephine had built was maintained carefully by the family, kept as close to its original state as possible. It became a gathering place for family reunions, a touchstone for all the Kanes to remember where they had come from, what their grandparents had built from nothing. And on summer evenings, when the family gathered on the porch to watch the sunset, they would tell stories about Gabriel and Josephine, about how they met, about the life they built, about the love that sustained them through hardships and carried them to old age. They would talk about Gabriel's kindness and strength, about Josephine's determination and grace, about the way they had looked at each other even after decades of marriage, as if the other person was the most wonderful thing in the world. The youngest children would listen with wide eyes, learning about the great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents they had never known but whose legacy lived on in every one of them. They would learn that love was about seeing the whole person, not just what was on the surface. That worth was not measured by physical perfection, but by strength of character. That 2 people working together with love and determination could overcome anything. And sometimes, when the light was just right and the wind whispered through the desert sage, it almost seemed like Gabriel and Josephine were there too, sitting on that porch, hands clasped, watching the sunset together as they had done for so many years. Still together, still in love, still showing the way forward for all those who came after them. The story of how Josephine limped into a general store and walked straight into Gabriel's heart became a family legend, passed down through generations. It was a reminder that what others saw as weakness could be strength, that every step, no matter how difficult, could lead to exactly where you needed to be. And that true love sees not with eyes but with the heart, finding beauty and worth where others see only imperfection. Gabriel and Josephine's love story lived on, not just in the family they had created, but in the example they had set, in the values they had lived by, in the way they had refused to let others define what was possible for them. They had built a life on love and hard work and unwavering faith in each other, and that foundation proved strong enough to support generations. Their headstone, simple but elegant, bore the inscription that James had chosen: Gabriel and Josephine Kane. They walked through life together, and love showed them the way. It was simple but true, capturing in a few words what their lives had been about. Love had been their compass, their strength, their legacy. And so their story ended, as all stories must, but also continued as the best stories do in the lives of those they left behind. The ranch still stood. The family still thrived. The love still echoed through the generations, a testament to what was possible when 2 people saw each other truly, loved each other fully, and walked through life together, step by step, no matter what obstacles lay in their path. Josephine's limp, once a source of mockery and shame, had indeed led her straight to Gabriel, and he to her. And in finding each other, they had found everything they needed to build a life of meaning, purpose, love, and lasting happiness. It was a journey that had begun with a single brave statement in a dusty general store, and ended with a legacy that would never be forgotten, a love that would never die, and a family that would forever remember that the path to true happiness is not always straight, but it always leads exactly where it needs to go.